Imagine waking up one morning to the news that the banks are closed. You grab your phone to check your balance and the app won't load. The ATM down the street has a sign taped to it, out of service. Shops are open, but no one wants your debit card. Gas stations demand cash only. Rent is due, but the landlord won't take a transfer. At first, you assume it's a glitch, some temporary outage, but then you notice the mood in the streets. People are lining up outside shuttered bank branches. Supermarkets are full of customers with carts stacked high, paying with crumpled bills because plastic is useless. The television blares updates. The financial system is under emergency review. And suddenly, the thought hits you like ice water. Your money isn't where you thought it was. It's not in your account, ready to be withdrawn. It was always just numbers on a screen. And the screen has gone dark. It sounds like the setup for a dystopian novel, but it's not. It has happened before, and not in some far-off, unstable nation you never think about. It has happened in countries that thought themselves modern, safe, and secure. And when it happens, life doesn't slow down politely. It snaps. The rules of wealth and survival shift overnight. Take Argentina, the year 2001. After years of economic mismanagement, debt, and IMF bailouts, the government was desperate. Banks were bleeding deposits as citizens tried to convert pesos into dollars and move them abroad. So the government slammed the doors shut. They called it the corralito, the little corral. But for ordinary Argentinians, it was a cage. Cash withdrawals were capped at 250 pesos a week. Accounts denominated in dollars were forcibly converted into devalued pesos. In just weeks, savings meant for homes, businesses, or retirement lost half their real value. People banged pots and pans in the streets. Middle-class families that had thought of themselves as safe and stable were suddenly thrown into chaos. That is what happens when banks shut down. Money evaporates, not in some abstract sense, but in the way bread, milk, and rent become unaffordable overnight. And Argentina is not alone. Cyprus, 2013. The European Union forced the government to freeze bank deposits as part of a bailout deal. Ordinary depositors woke up to discover that accounts over 100,000 euros would be raided, literally seized, to rescue failing banks. It wasn't the billionaires who felt it most. It was businesses that suddenly couldn't pay employees, retirees who couldn't access their pensions, parents who couldn't cover tuition for their children. In Lebanon in 2019, years of corruption and fiscal collapse triggered capital controls. Banks limited withdrawals to a few $100s a month, no matter how much was in your account. Savers stormed branches, not with paperwork, but with guns. And in each of these cases, the story was the same. What you thought was your money turned out to be theirs. Even in the United States, the land of this could never happen here, the banks have closed. In 1933, in the depths of the Great Depression, President Franklin Roosevelt declared a nationwide bank holiday. For 4 days, every single bank in the country shut its doors. Citizens couldn't withdraw cash, businesses couldn't pay wages, and uncertainty reigned. It was only after the government inspected and selectively reopened banks that public confidence was slowly rebuilt. But think about it. One of the wealthiest nations on earth had to literally freeze its entire banking system just to prevent collapse. The common thread in all these stories is that banks don't hold your money the way you think they do. They operate on fractional reserves. For every dollar deposited, only a fraction stays in the vault. The rest is loaned out, invested, transformed into debt. When too many people demand cash at the same time, the illusion breaks. And governments, instead of admitting the fragility, often side with the banks. They freeze withdrawals. They devalue deposits. They make you pay for the system's mistakes. Now imagine that happening tomorrow in your own city. What would you do? Would you have cash for a week, for a month? Could you pay your mortgage if the bank itself was the problem? Could you feed your family if the digital numbers vanished? This isn't about paranoia. It's about facing the uncomfortable truth. The financial system is not built to protect you. It's built to protect itself. And when stress hits, you'll discover that banks are not vaults of security, but fragile machines of confidence. Once that confidence cracks, money and power flow in directions you can't control. That's the nightmare scenario. And as we've seen from Argentina to Cyprus, from Lebanon to the United States itself, it's not hypothetical, it's history. And history has a nasty way of repeating itself. When we peel back the surface of these crises, the pattern becomes painfully clear. Banks don't collapse because of random chance, they collapse because of how they are built. Fractional reserve banking, the core of our financial system, is both its genius and its Achilles heel. In simple terms, banks do not sit on your deposits, waiting for you to pick them up like coats at a check room. They take your money and multiply it. If you deposit $1,000, the bank might keep 50 in reserve and lend the rest out, to a business, to a home buyer, to the government itself. That loan in turn becomes someone else's deposit, which can then be lent again. Out of thin air, $1,000 becomes $5,000 or $10,000 in circulating credit. It is a machine that fuels growth. But it is also a house of cards, because if too many people come asking for their original 1,000 at the same time, the bank doesn't have it. This is why confidence is everything. The system works as long as people trust that the doors will stay open. But the moment that trust falters, a run begins. It doesn't take everyone demanding their money, just enough people to expose the thin layer of reserves. And once the panic spreads, even solvent banks can go under. It's like fire in a crowded theater. One scream, one rush for the exit, and suddenly survival is a stampede. Governments know this. That is why, in crisis after crisis, their instinct is not to protect the individual saver, but to protect the banks. When Argentina imposed the corralito, it wasn't out of malice. It was because if they had allowed people to keep withdrawing, the banks would have collapsed in a week. When Cyprus imposed bail-ins, seizing depositors' money to recapitalize the system, it was sold as tough medicine. But the reality was brutal. The ordinary citizen was forced to underwrite the mistakes of politicians, bankers, and international creditors. In the United States in 1933, Roosevelt wasn't just calming the public. He was buying time to stop a cascade of failures. The truth is, banks and governments are joined at the hip. Banks need governments to enforce confidence, guarantee deposits, and backstop them in crises. Governments need banks to buy their bonds, finance their deficits, and channel credit into the economy. When stress hits, they close ranks, and the person left out is you, the depositor, the taxpayer, the supposed owner of your money. The illusion is reinforced by rules and insurance schemes. Deposit insurance sounds like protection. In America, the FDIC guarantees accounts up to $250,000. But ask yourself, if every depositor in the country rushed to claim that guarantee, would the money be there? No, the insurance fund is a fraction of deposits. Its real power is psychological. It is a placebo designed to keep you calm. And what happens when the banks shut? Commerce grinds to a halt. Digital payments vanish. Salaries are delayed. Supply chains seize up. In Lebanon, factories couldn't import raw materials because they couldn't wire dollars abroad. In Greece, during the 2015 crisis, people lined up at ATMs in the blazing heat, waiting hours to withdraw a mere 60 euros a day. Weddings were postponed, surgeries delayed, children pulled out of schools, all because the financial system had decided that access to money was no longer a right, but a privilege to be rationed. Even in the age of smartphones, crypto, and fintech apps, the problem hasn't gone away. In fact, it has deepened. The digitalization of money has made us more dependent than ever on banks and centralized systems. If the server goes down, if the card reader fails, if the institution freezes your account, your wealth is suddenly nothing but digits in limbo. In a cashless society, the idea of bank shutdown isn't some ancient fear from the Great Depression. It is a modern nightmare waiting to happen. Now think about the ripple effects. Businesses can't pay workers, so layoffs spread. Supermarkets can't pay suppliers, so shelves empty. Investors panic, selling assets at fire sale prices, draining retirement accounts and pensions. The government scrambles to restore confidence, but every day the lines grow longer and the patience thinner. What began as a technical decision in a boardroom cascades into a full-blown social crisis. And the longer it drags on, the more desperate people become, bartering, hoarding, even rioting. This is not theoretical. It has happened in nations across the globe. It could happen again. And if you think it could never happen in America, Britain, or Germany, remember, those are exactly the words spoken in Argentina in 2000, in Greece in 2010, in Lebanon in 2018. Stability is an illusion until the day it isn't. The uncomfortable reality is this. Banks do not exist primarily to protect your wealth. They exist to protect themselves and the system they serve. When stress comes, they will sacrifice you to survive. The system is built this way, and pretending otherwise is the most dangerous mistake of all. Imagine waking up tomorrow to find your bank's website offline, your debit card declined, and your paycheck delayed indefinitely. Now, stretch that beyond a day or two. What if the shutdown lasted weeks? Would you have cash to cover food, rent, and bills? Could your employer even pay you if payroll systems were frozen? This is where the fiction merges into terrifying reality. Banks are not neutral vaults. They are arteries of the economy. Cut them off, and everything downstream begins to die. The lessons of past crises aren't dusty history, they're warnings. When Argentina closed its banks in 2001, the rage on the streets wasn't just about money, it was about betrayal. Ordinary people felt like hostages of a system they couldn't trust. In Cyprus in 2013, middle-class savers watched decades of careful work vaporized overnight to save institutions deemed too big to fail. In Lebanon, the collapse shredded the very idea of citizenship, as people realized their leaders had gambled away their future. And in the United States, the Great Depression scarred an entire generation into saving habits that lasted a lifetime. What ties all of these stories together is the same uncomfortable truth. Your money is only yours until the system says otherwise. A number on a bank app feels secure until it isn't. And that is why the lesson for today is so critical. In a world of record government debt, fragile global supply chains, and rising geopolitical tensions, the idea of a bank holiday or capital controls is not far-fetched. It is a tool in the state's arsenal. So what can you do? No, the answer is not panic withdrawals or stuffing cash under a mattress. History shows that reactionary fear only makes you more vulnerable. The real strategy is resilience. Diversification is not a buzzword. It is survival. Having assets in more than one form, more than one institution, even more than one country, can mean the difference between paralysis and mobility. Real wealth is not just what you earn, but what you can actually access in a crisis. Gold, real estate, alternative stores of value, even cash reserves. These are not old-fashioned ideas. They are lifelines. And beyond the personal, there is the collective. We must recognize how laws are written. Time and again, governments design financial protections that sound like they protect citizens, but really shield the system. Deposit insurance, emergency powers, capital controls, these are ways of managing panic, not preventing collapse. If we don't understand this, we become complacent. If we do understand it, we can pressure for better rules, for transparency, and for accountability in a system that has shown repeatedly it will put itself before us. The haunting part of this story is how fragile confidence really is. Banks don't need to collapse physically. They only need people to stop believing. The moment that faith cracks, the countdown begins. And once a shutdown is declared, the mask slips. The banks were never neutral, never just service providers. They are power structures, deeply tied to governments, corporations, and global markets. You are not a client. You are a participant in a system that works until it doesn't. History doesn't repeat exactly, but its echoes are loud. The lesson from Argentina, Cyprus, Lebanon, Greece, and the United States is simple. Do not confuse access with ownership. If your wealth only exists at the mercy of institutions, then it is not truly yours. To build financial freedom, you must look past the illusion of safety and prepare for the moments when the system falters. Because one day, the question might not be, what if banks shut down tomorrow, but what do I do now that they already have? If this gave you a new perspective, hit subscribe. History has the answers. I'll show you where to look.